Right, hello and welcome to this video on the liberal state, its methods and structures. This, as with the previous videos, forms part of the AQA Government and Politics course in the ideology section, focusing of course on liberalism. So, the liberal state, as I'll have alluded to in previous videos, is obviously central to liberal ideologies, and we've looked at what its objectives are. We're now going to have a look at how it is the liberal state brings this about. Now, does this for three main ways, and the first one is via constitutional or limited government. Now, what that means, in effect, is that you have a government that is linked to a constitution, okay? And this is linked to government by consent. Remember, liberals believe that individuals have to opt into government. They have to decide. There has to be an agreement between the government and the governed that they're going to be allowed to rule. So citizens have to opt in order for this to happen. Now, in order for that to be a reality, liberals say that any contracts, remember your social contract, which is the contract which you create between yourself and the rulers in order to leave the state of nature, that contract has to be in the form of a formal constitution. Okay, so if you create a contract between yourselves and the government, it has to be formal, okay, or codified is another word for it if it's a written down constitution, as in the case with the United States. It doesn't have to be codified, it doesn't have to be written down, but it does have to be a formal constitution. It has to physically exist. Now, what liberals also believe is that a constitution should only be created after extensive discussion between, obviously, the governed and the government. Remember that liberals believe intensely in rationalism, and because of that belief in rationalism, they think that any kind of extensive, detailed discussion will lead to consensus eventually. So that formal constitution should be created partly through formal discussion in order to make sure that all the parties are happy with it, and that of course will lead to consensus and will in theory keep everybody happy. So, limited government basically just refers to the government having its actions limited by the rules set out in the Constitution. It is as simple as that. It means that the government has to rule according to a set of rules. It can't just do what it wants. It is limited in what it can do. So a really clear example of this would be in the United States, where governments will find it, or the federal government will find it difficult to bring in gun control laws because of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. The US Constitution stating that, in a rather simplified manner, that US citizens have the right to bear arms and the government won't infringe. Therefore, the government finds it very hard to bring in any kind of meaningful laws to deal with that. Now, it also ensures that a government can't remove the natural rights of its citizens. Now, that reality, that ability is often enshrined in a Bill of Rights as well. So there will be a separate document running alongside the Constitution that stops the government from removing these natural rights. Now, this contrasts massively with pre-Enlightenment monarchies, which, remember, they ruled without limits. If your monarch decided to remove the power of the people, they could do that. And there were no limits at all, no limited government. So Charles I, for example, was able to remove Parliament and rule without Parliament. That would be an example of a pre-Enlightenment government in effect. Whereas post-Enlightenment, it's believed the government can't do that. Okay, the Bill of Rights, the formal constitution, prevents them from being able to circumvent that. It keeps them on the straight and narrow. So, the second part is fragmented government. Now, this stems from basically that liberals don't want power to be concentrated in the hands of one individual, okay, or one branch of government. No one group or one individual should have all of the power. Now, again, this is a reaction to those pre-Enlightenment states. It's a reaction to those monarchies, those dictatorships, where all the power is held by one person. They could do what they wanted to do, when they wanted to do, with no limits to their power. And when Lord Acton famously stated that absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. So one of the best ways to stop people from being corrupted by absolute power is simply to ensure that there are limits on it, or that it's fragmented, so you don't have one person with all of the power. Now, this is also linked to liberalism's belief in rationality, and what they believe is that because people are rational and people are reasonable, okay, and people believe in self-determination, and they're very fond of self-determination, then ultimately any kind of liberal state should involve as many individuals as possible. And that's at all levels. So people should be involved in voting. You should be able to have a wide range of people involved in making government decisions. But ultimately, because of that rationality, there should be the maximum number of people possible helping out to make decisions in a state. Now, the US Constitution is a really clear example of fragmented government for a number of reasons. It was heavily influenced by the ideas of Locke, as so many things are in liberalism, particularly the idea of individualism and that protection of natural rights. And the Constitution puts into place a series of checks and balances, and what these do is they prevent power from being held solely by one institution or one branch of government. So remember, in the United States government, you have the executive, which is the president, you have the legislature, which is Congress, and you have the Supreme Court, the judiciary. Now, each of those are able to block each other. So if the president brings in some form of bill or some form of presidential order which is seen to be unconstitutional, the Supreme Court can block it. The president can veto bills put forward by Congress. So what that means is that unless you have consensus between all three parts of government, you can't simply force things through. You can't just have one powerful person making decisions and running with it. And of course, remember, because of liberalism's view of people being reasonable and rational, remember, any kind of in-depth discussion is going to result in consensus. So they wouldn't see fragmented government as being an issue. They would believe simply that people would eventually resolve and deal with their issues, in effect. Now, examples of how fragmented government works are as follows. Okay, you can have separation of powers, as in the United States. Okay, a separate executive, legislature, and judiciary, which means that no one has got more power than the other. You could have power separated solely within the legislature. You can have any combination of these as well, just to clarify. But you can have a bicameral or a two-house legislature. Okay, so similar to Congress with the Senate and the House of Representatives, or in the UK Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Again, no one house has all of the power. Okay, a Bill of Rights that can't be easily amended. Now, what that means is that Bill of Rights will always be in place, regardless of a government's short-term objectives. So if it's difficult to change, the government can't change it on a whim. And again, it protects people's rights. Okay, linked into that, you get a Supreme Court often, and this is generally used to uphold the Bill of Rights, and it's able to overrule the legislature. So again, if the legislature or an executive brings in something that they see as being perhaps unconstitutional, the Supreme Court can block it. And also a federal system, so similar to the US, where power is given, or lawmaking powers are given to states or regions, and within that they are able to self-determine and again limit the power of government. So in America, for example, you have the death penalty in Texas but not in California. It means that you don't simply have one powerful person making all of the decisions. Now, the final way that liberalism brings the state into being, as it were, is via formal equality. So the provision of equality in the structures of a liberal state is based, remember, on those beliefs of foundational equality. A recap on that, okay? Foundational equality or legal equality is the belief that all individuals are born equal, that all individuals have those equal natural rights, okay, those natural rights being things like freedom of speech, the right to property, and all individuals are entitled to legal equality. So that's equal before the law and having equal rights. Okay, no one should be discriminated against in terms of their relationship to the law based on who they are. Now, liberals believe that laws passed by the state apply to everyone. No one is exempt from this. Okay, no one should be outside of the law or be considered to be above the law. Okay, an example of this would be the impeachment of US presidents. So, when Nixon was found to be guilty during the Watergate scandal, he was impeached and he was prosecuted. He was deemed to have broken the law. Now, if you take that back to pre-Enlightenment monarchies, English monarchs, for example, were generally seen to be above the law. Certainly, monarchs prior to King John and the Magna Carta, that is the first instance where an English monarch is seen to have to adhere to the laws. But pre-King John, pre-Magna Carta, monarchs were outside and above the law. They could act as they wished and no one could hold them to account. So that's a massive difference from what's come before. Okay, now the manner in which the law is applied should be formally set out in the Constitution, and all citizens should have equal political rights. Now, these are things like, well, these ultimately kind of link to your natural rights. Okay, so you should have freedom of speech, and that freedom of speech should be legally protected. Okay, there should be legal protections, formal protections in place to give you freedom of speech. So the government can't simply clamp down on you and prevent you from voicing your discontent at their actions. Equally, you should have the equal right, same right as anybody else to petition Parliament. So, for example, in the UK, any British citizen can talk to their MP, lobby their MP, and get their Member of Parliament to represent them in the House of Commons. Now, that means that we all have that equal right. Okay, and again, nobody should ever be discriminated against with regards to being able to petition Parliament because of who they are. Okay, and these are all the different ways, ultimately, that the liberal state brings about its ideologies. Okay, these are the methods that it uses.